The government's controversial plan to deport migrants to Rwanda could cost more than keeping the asylum seekers in the UK. That's according to government's own analysis, but there is more to it than meets the eye, because an economic impact report into the illegal migration bill says that deportations to a safe country would cost around 60 grand more per individual. The Home Office report found that sending an individual to Rwanda would cost about 170 grand. That's higher than the estimated 106 grand to process a migrant in the UK, which includes accommodation at 85 quid per night and supporting them for an estimated, get this, 4 years while their asylum claim is processed. That is an estimated £63,000 more to send a migrant to Rwanda. But last year, nearly 46,000 people crossed the channel on boats. And if the crossings continue to rise at the current rate, the report found it would cost the UK £32 million a day by the end of 2026. So to effectively break even, the Rwanda plan would have to deter 37% of people crossing the channel, and the Home Office believes that it would do that. Joining me now to discuss this is Jonathan Gullis, the Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North. Jonathan, thank you. What this report doesn't factor in is the ongoing cost of keeping someone in accommodation, finding them a social house, looking after their kids and sending them to school, making sure they've got a GP's appointment and everything else.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Patrick. Ultimately, what is happening here is the Home Office is making it very clear that the Rwanda policy is a deterrent factor. It deters people from needlessly risking their lives, putting thousands of pounds in the hands of smugglers, and hopefully will have a really positive impact in making sure that as numbers drop, which I think they will because people will be deterred, we'll see that cost come down for the taxpayer, because fewer and fewer people will need processing, fewer and fewer people will need to be kept in accommodation, fewer and fewer people will need to be put in social housing, in school places, in GP surgeries, etc. So there's a lot of positives here that we don't talk enough about. It's just a shame the Shadow Home Secretary hasn't got the memo, because all they ever talk about on the Labour benches, Patrick, is speeding up processing. What they really mean by that is, let's have an amnesty, but they don't want to say that because they know it'll be political suicide.
Where we're at now, and I think it's time that people fronted up to it, isn't it? Where they just said, instead of saying no to Rwanda, instead of saying no to turning boats back, instead of saying no to detention centres, instead of saying no to everything, why don't they just admit that they don't like borders and they want to let everybody in?
Well, I totally agree with you, Patrick. It's so frustrating to see, muttering under his breath, the Shadow Immigration Minister, Stephen Kinnock, saying it won't deter people, as though, because of course he knows better than everyone else. He's so clever, so intelligent, so pious. It's amazing his ego fits inside the House of Parliament, to be perfectly frank with you. But ultimately, what we have learned from this is that I have every faith that the Court of Appeal is going to find with the government, as the High Court already did. Hopefully we'll be able to get those planes off the ground as soon as possible. And then the Labour Party is going to have to answer the question, Patrick, that if they are to get into government next year, and the poll suggests that they might do, they need to be able to answer the question. If they were in charge, what would they do? Would they cancel the Rwanda policy? And they've been very coy since the turn of the year not to fully say those words, because ultimately what they're preparing for is yet another U-turn, something that we know Keir Starmer is so fond of.
Look, if the Rwanda plan stops the boats, there's no way Labour's reversing that. Look at what happened in Australia. They turned the boats back, it got massive criticism, it stopped illegal immigration, the next party comes in, they keep the exact same policy in. So they're not going to change anything whatsoever that actually stops the boats. The question is about value for money, though, Jonathan, I must say. It is a lot of money per migrant. Are you convinced that it would act as a deterrent? It would have to stop apparently 37% of crossings. That's a lot of people.
No, absolutely, I'm convinced, because when I was on the Nationality and Borders Act bill committee, as it was back then, we heard from the Australian High Commissioner, who made it very clear that this did act as a deterrent when they were using such a model in Australia. They obviously empowered smugglers, as they've even themselves reported to local authorities in France, for example, that when the Rwanda scheme was being talked about, people were starting in France to ask about making themselves settled status in the French region. So ultimately, we see firsthand from French officials and smugglers who have been captured that the Rwanda policy would be damaging, would break apart their operational model. And I think, yes, it will be a hit in the short term to the public finance, but ultimately will drive down those costs long term, act as the deterrent that we need it to, and hopefully, therefore, get control of our borders, which I know so many people are desperate to see, particularly your very sound viewers on GB News, who ultimately voted to leave, I'm sure, in large amounts in 2016, and voted for the Conservatives, many for the first time, because they wanted to deliver on those promises to take back control of our laws and our borders.
And what do you say to those people who then go, well, look, you know, it says it's £63,000 less to just keep those people here. It's not cost-effective and it's inhumane.
Well, I remind those people, Patrick, that as you said earlier, that doesn't take into cost the amount of social housing that we'll need to put people up in, and potentially housing in the future, the school places, and therefore the money per pupil per year that child will experience, the cost of the NHS that obviously won't be factored in or long term as well. And of course, just as the immigration minister said, the social cohesion that will be challenged as well in local communities. Ultimately, people need to understand that, yes, there might be a saving by processing quicker, but if we carry on accepting 70% plus, which we are at the moment, of those who come here illegally, that is, as I say, the Labour's plan for an amnesty. I, at the very least, want to get down to those French numbers of at least 18%, because if the French can do it, why the hell can't we? And I'm just very disappointed today, Patrick, to hear that the government has dropped, obviously, the plan under Dominic Raab, which was to obviously scrap the Human Rights Act and ignore the ECHR. I think these are things that would have helped us on delivering this important piece of legislation like the illegal migration bill.
This is what a lot of people get very frustrated at, which is that there is the whiff of a good idea that might actually solve the problem, and then by the time it goes through the Commons, the teeth of it are pulled out. And so you're kind of making your lives difficult, and there doesn't appear to be that much investment into actually getting more people in the Home Office to process these claims, which, you know, as long as they aren't all, you know, bang in favour of open-door migration, which might be a bit of a stretch, but as long as they aren't, they might actually process some people and then say to them, no, you can't come here. So do you really think that Rishi Sunak understands the importance of him actually stopping the boats, as opposed to just standing on a plinth and saying it?
No, look, I've got to give full credit to the Prime Minister here, because I've generally been in the room with him many times, listening to his passion, his attention to detail, and the fact that I know he's having, I think, once, maybe even 2 meetings per week with the Chancellor, with the Home Secretary, with the team in Number 10, to make sure that when this Rwanda policy has gone through our domestic courts and been approved, that the operationalisation of the policy is ready to go immediately. And so I do think he understands it, and I hope he understands it as well, because ultimately, let's be honest, Patrick, you've seen the polling. If the Conservatives don't get a grip of this, then they're absolutely done at the next general election. And
it is amazing, isn't it? Because it's not as if the other party is actually really proposing a serious solution. And in fact, they are pretty much holding their hands up and saying, well, we're not really going to try and stop the boats that much, and we're probably just going to maybe end up with more people here. And people are just so annoyed with the way the Tories have been going about it, they might accept that. Look, Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Gullis there, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, reacting to whether or not you think it's value for money, this Rwanda plan scheme. Supposedly it's going to cost around £63,000 more in the short term to get people flown over to Rwanda. Of course, you've got to factor in those knock-on costs of keeping people here indefinitely. Schooling, housing, health, etc. gbviews at gbnews.com. Just one quick one. The cost of sending migrants abroad for assessment is expensive. He says it's much better to just turn the boats back. That is from John. Keep these views coming in. Now, you can get loads more on that story on our website, gbnews.com, which is, of course, the fastest-growing news site in the country. Loads of the best opinion, analysis and big breaking news.